If you were to read straight through the Old Testament, you will notice something interesting. You will notice a paradox that runs all the way through the story. The paradox is everywhere in the Old Testament, and it's quite the head scratcher. It's quite the head scratcher. But we see this paradox most explicitly, I think, in today's passage, in Exodus chapter 19. So let's look at it together. Point number 1 in your outline today is the paradox. The paradox that runs all the way through the Old Testament. It's laid out here for us in verses 1 through 19. So let's read verses 1 through 19 first, and then we'll finish out the chapter. Let's look at the paradox together. Exodus 19, verse 1. On the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully, keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you." Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes. And be ready by the 3rd day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, 'Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain.'" After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, "Prepare yourselves for the 3rd day. Abstain from sexual relations." On the morning of the 3rd day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. All right, so the paradox is this. God deeply desires to be near us, but he is too holy, and we are too sinful for him to come near us. Therefore, we have a paradox. A God who deeply desires to be near us, but we are a people who are too sinful for him to do so. And we've seen so far in the book of Exodus, we've seen God miraculously delivering his people from bondage in Egypt. He says here in verse 4, "I carried you on eagle's wings," which means what? It means that Israel played no role in their own rescue, okay? You don't carry yourself on eagle's wings, do you? No. Yahweh alone set Israel free. This is, by the way, what we call salvation by grace. Israel does nothing, and God does everything to rescue them. Salvation by grace. But notice, he didn't just set them free and say, "Okay, go now. You are now free to roam about the earth." Right? No, that's not what he says. Look at the second half of verse 4. He says, "I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. See that? So Yahweh set Israel free in order to bring them to himself. That was the purpose, okay? Set them free, not so that they can roam about the earth, but so that he can bring them to himself. But we see now in chapter 19 the paradox. God has at last brought Israel to his mountain, right? There's just one problem. They can't come near it. They can't come near it. In fact, they can't even touch it, or they will die. They'll die. Even their animals will die. If little Fluffy touches the mountain, she's dead. What in the world is going on? Why is that? Why is this the case at all? Why can't they all just rush up the mountain and hug Yahweh? Give him a big old hug and a kiss. Why can't they do that? Well, it's because Yahweh is not a teddy bear. He's not a teddy bear. You see, some of you here today believe in a God who is a big, warm, fuzzy teddy bear. He's just sweet and cuddly, you know. But that's not who Yahweh is. Yahweh is, in fact, terrifyingly holy. He is absolutely perfect in all of his attributes. He is a God of infinite power, majesty, righteousness, and glory. And interestingly, I read this week. Most ancient cities were built around a ziggurat. What's a ziggurat? Well, a ziggurat is essentially a temple in the shape of a pyramid. And it's kind of a tiered pyramid, right? It kind of works its way up to the top. Now, why was a ziggurat built like that? Well, the basic idea was that the people could work their way up the pyramid to get to their deity, okay? To get to their God, right? So, you give God the fruit of your labor, you give him your sacrifices, you pay homage, etc., okay? You do all of these different things to climb higher and higher up your deity's pyramid to eventually get to him, okay? That was the idea. Well, what do you think Mount Sinai is? It is Yahweh's chosen pyramid. That's what it is. This is Yahweh's ziggurat. But this one is way, way different than normal. Way different. Yahweh says, not only can you not climb my pyramid, this mountain, you can't even touch it, or you'll die. You can't work your way up. You can't even touch it, let alone climb it, okay? And so you see, folks, here's what's happening. We are just plainly too sinful. We're too sinful, and God is far too holy for us to even think about getting close to him. This is the reality that we're in. Now, in the story today, we see all these grand visual and auditory effects. And they only serve to illustrate this point further. Right? So if you notice in our text, we have an eardrum-piercing trumpet blast. We have the whole mountain shaking violently. We have fire and darkness and smoke and thunder and lightning. Moses and the people are terrified. They're terrified. And they're running for cover. But this, of course, is the reaction of everyone who meets God, since he's not a teddy bear, This is the reaction of everyone. So God appeared to Jacob as a powerful wrestler. He appeared to Job as a hurricane. He appeared to Moses as a blazing fire twice. He appeared to Joshua as a man of war, armed to the teeth. He appeared to Ezekiel in such a frightening way that Ezekiel struggled to even describe it. Ezekiel's hand is trembling as he's writing his book. And later on, Moses says, Lord, show me your glory. And God says, I can't. It would kill you. Now, if God's violent reaction to our presence bothers you, the reason it bothers you is because virtually all of us are in deep denial as to how sinful we really are. Deep, deep denial. Now, sure, you say that you're sinful because you know that's what you're supposed to say. You know that's what you're supposed to say. But the truth is, if we could see the sniffling cowards that we really are, the self-consumed narcissists that we really are, what depths of cruelty we're really capable of, what stench of self-righteousness we really have. If we could see all of that, I think we would die. I do. I think we would lay down and die. Why do I say that? Well, here's why I say that. Because no matter how much we say with our lips, oh, I know God loves me. And the only reason I have any self-worth at all is because of God's love. We say that, we say that, but I'm telling you, even the most mature Christians, to a great degree, get their self-worth from their own achievements, from their own hard work, from their own good looks, from their own intelligence, from their own talents, from their own wealth, from their own righteousness. They don't get their self-worth from God's love at all. They get it from their own virtue. And I can say this with tremendous confidence this morning for 3 reasons. Number 1, because I am guilty of this myself. Number 2, because I have met with enough Christians over the years to see this plainly. Y'all don't get your self-worth from God's love. You get it from your own virtue, your own righteousness. And number 3, because the Bible itself paints a very explicit picture of the human heart, and it ain't pretty. It ain't pretty. And so, if you and I were to see a clear picture of who we really are deep down, we'd fall apart. We'd fall apart. I once heard a counselor at an Ivy League school. She said this, she said that her calendar is booked up all day, every day, with students from the school. All day, every day of the year. Now, why is that? Well, it's because these kids from all over the world were the smartest people in their hometowns. They were straight A valedictorians. But now, they're at this prestigious school where everyone is just as smart as them. And in fact, a whole bunch of students are smarter than them. Some of them a lot smarter. And so their world falls apart. The world comes crashing down. Now, why is that? Well, it's because their identity was built on being uniquely intelligent, right? And now they're just a number in the student registry. They're no different than anybody else. They're not special. They're not unique. They're just exactly like everyone else. And the world falls apart. So, if getting into the presence of human superlativeness practically decimates you, what must it be like to get into the presence of God? If human superlativeness does this to these students at the Ivy League, or to actors, who moved to Los Angeles, this happens to them, They were the best actor in their hometown, but when they moved to Los Angeles, whoops, I'm not as good as I thought I was. If this happens in the presence of human superlativeness, what in the world must it be like to get into the presence of God? Even a touch of the presence of God makes you feel tiny, inadequate, sinful, and flawed. This is why when Isaiah met God, he screamed, "Woe is me, for I am ruined." This is why when Peter saw that first miracle from Jesus, the first thing he said was, "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." This is why when Job met God, he buried his face in the dirt. And actually, you know what? You don't have to have thunder and fire and storms and miracles to understand the terrifying holiness of God. No. All you need is the Sermon on the Mount. That's all you need. What do I mean? Well, Dr. Virginia Samoans, she's an English professor at a secular university, and she says something really fascinating. She once gave her students the assignment of reading the Sermon on the Mount and writing a response paper to it. Now, most of these secular students, they've never heard of the Sermon on the Mount, never even heard of it. So this is their very first exposure to it, okay? The very first reading of it. And Dr. Samoan says that most of her students utterly hated it. They hated it. Here's a couple quotes from the students. One student wrote this, quote, "I did not like the Sermon on the Mount. It made me feel like I had to be perfect, and no one is," end quote. Another student wrote, quote, "The things asked in this sermon are absurd. To look at a woman is adultery. To be angry with someone is murder. These are the most extreme, stupid, unhuman statements I have ever heard," end quote. Do you see what's happening? Just like Israel at Mount Sinai, when those students heard the Sermon on the Mount, they ran for cover. They're trying to get away. And that is, in fact, the whole point of the Sermon on the Mount. These secular students understood the sermon better than most Christians do. Here's what Dr. Samoan says about all this. She says, quote, Finally, biblical illiteracy has come to the point where people are able to respond to Jesus' words without filtering them through 2,000 years of cultural haze. Honest, ignorant ears hear his words how they really are. They are terrifying, end quote. They're terrifying. Over the years, I've heard so many Christians say, well, all we need to do, is just live by the Sermon on the Mount. That's all we got to do. It's just that simple. And I say, really? Have you ever read it? Have you ever actually read it? I mean, that sounds cute and all, but have you actually ever read the Sermon on the Mount? I mean, let's just look at the first few lines of the sermon this morning, shall we? Just look at the first few lines. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Folks, we just cleared out the room. We just cleared out the room. No one in here today meets that standard. Most of all, me. No one in here meets that standard, and we're not even a quarter of the way through the sermon yet. Not even a quarter of the way. It gets much more intense from here. Much, much more intense. And so this is our paradox. It's the paradox. We have a God who wants to be near us, but we are so dreadfully sinful and he is so terrifyingly holy that he can't be near us. So, what now? Does this paradox have a solution? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It's right here in the text. Point number 2 in your outline, the solution. The solution to the paradox. It's right here in the text. Let's look at it. It's verses 20 through 25. 20 through 25. Verse 20. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, Go down and warn the people, so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. Moses said to the Lord, The people cannot come up Mount Sinai, because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy. The Lord replied, Go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. So, How can an infinitely glorious and holy God befriend sinners like us? The answer is through a mediator. It's through a mediator. The people could not climb God's mountain, but Moses could. Moses could. See? He went where Israel could not. He could go up and down the mountain as he pleased. God made him Israel's mediator and allowed him to go where the people could not. But what about you and me? We're sinful too. We're rebellious too, just as Israel. So how do we get to God? The exact same way. The exact same way. Except, of course, we have a mediator who's much better than Moses. A lot better than Moses. And in order to bring us to God, he climbed a mountain too. But not Mount Sinai. It was Mount Calvary. And on that mountain, he entered into the full, terrifying fury of God in our place. He took the fire. He took the darkness. He took the earthquake. He took the lightning. He took the storm of God's wrath for your sins and for mine. He went where you and I could not go. And so what is our situation now? The author of Hebrews tells us our situation. He writes this in chapter 12. He says, "You have not come to a mountain that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, 'I am trembling with fear.' But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly. To the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all. To the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to his sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." Now, what does all this mean? This is pretty awesome. Now, what does it mean exactly that the blood that speaks a better word than Abel? What is the author of Hebrews talking about there? Well, you see, after Cain killed Abel, God came to Cain and said, "What have you done? The blood of Abel cries out to me from the ground." So you see that when Abel was murdered, that was the first really the act of injustice in world history, right? And so the blood of Abel cried out, "Justice! Avenge me!" And the writer of Hebrews has the audacity to say, yeah, Moses was a mediator. He kept Israel safe from God's fury. But Jesus is the ultimate mediator. Why? Because when Abel died, his blood cried out, "Justice!" But when Jesus died on the cross, his blood cried out, "Forgiveness." His blood cries out, "Yes, Father, they are sinful, but be near to them, because I have paid their penalty in their place. Their sins are no more." On the cross, you see, the Father abandoned Jesus so that he could always be near to us. Don't you see, my friends? Because of the blood of Jesus, now we are the ziggurat. We are the temple of God, the place where his holy presence dwells. I told you our mediator is better than Moses. Because of Jesus, not only can we go up God's mountain, we are God's mountain. Christ has made us the very presence, the very temple of the living God. And so, no matter how sinful you think you are, and hey, maybe you're right, it doesn't matter. Because of Jesus, God's presence will dwell with you forever. Forever. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, it means a lot of things, but one thing it definitely means is absolute joy. Absolute joy. It means Christians have positively nothing to fear from God anymore. Nothing. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus was afraid of God, so that you and I never have to be. He was afraid for us. He took the wrath from God that we deserved, so that now there is no wrath left for us. Only joy, only peace, only rest. You see, folks, because Jesus, our great mediator, was shaken, you and I can live unshakable lives now and forever.